Hello everyone, this is Reza Dorrani. Today's video is chapter 1 in my role-based security series in PowerApps. I will show you how we can check the logged in user's role from a SharePoint list, SharePoint group, Microsoft 365 group, as well as a security group. So let's get started with the video, but first my introduction. The scenario for the role-based Power App here is a very simple travel request app. This is the home screen of the app where the user sees only their requests. They can filter their requests right here. The user can modify an existing request, or the user can go ahead and create a new travel request on the fly. Additionally, I also have an admin screen which basically shows all the requests that are available as part of the system. So in this case, in my data source, I only have 3 records. I'm trying to keep this very simple for the demo. 3 travel requests, 2 of them were created by Reza and 1 was created by a user called Sarah. So as an admin, I can see all the requests. Whereas if I go to the home screen, I will only see the current logged in user's request. Now the data source in question here is a SharePoint list of travel requests. And it's a very simple SharePoint list, and I literally just leveraged the Microsoft list template to create this. Now in SharePoint, whenever we create a site, we have 2 options to create a site. It could either be a team site or it could be a communication site. Now it's very important to understand how the security of both of these sites plays out. When you create a team site, you are basically creating a Microsoft 365 group, an identity in Azure AD that gets generated when you create your team site. In this example right here, this is a team site template that I have leveraged. And if I head over to the settings and go to site permissions, you will observe right here that if I go and invite people, I'm going to be adding the members or the users to groups. And these are my security groups. And what is the security group? It's the Microsoft 365 group or Office 365 group in Azure AD. And for every user that I add, I can make them a member or I can make them an owner. Now, if I head over to Azure AD and go to groups and search for the name of my SharePoint site, in my case, this site is called HR, you will observe right here is that identity that's created in AD. It says there's a group created of type Microsoft 365. So the permissions or the security of a team-based SharePoint site is actually driven from Azure AD. On the other side, if I was to create a communication site, in that case, the security is driven from SharePoint groups. Now in the same HR site, I have gone ahead and created a couple of my own SharePoint groups. Now these are purely SharePoint groups. They live within that SharePoint site. These are not groups that are getting generated in Azure AD. So when you create a communication site, in that case, the members, the owners would actually be SharePoint groups. In this site, I also have members and owners. And if I head over to that SharePoint group, which in this case is HR members, observe that it is connected to that security group in Azure AD. The next important thing to understand about PowerApps is once you build your app and you connect it to your data source, in my case, SharePoint, how does the sharing and the security work? Now, for this app, if I head over to share, I can go and share this app with my users. So let's go ahead and share this app with another user right now. I have another user called James. So I'll go and share this app with James as well. Now, a very important thing to understand here, and it's kind of highlighted right here for us. When I am sharing this app with James, there's something known as data permissions. And this basically are the connectors that I am using in my app. Currently, I'm leveraging all of these connectors. Of course, I'm using SharePoint because I'm connecting to my SharePoint list. Now, if you read the message here, it says, make sure your users have access to the data used in the app. That means it's your responsibility to ensure that the logged in user has access to those SharePoint lists. Otherwise, they're going to get an error. So let's go ahead and try this out. In this case, I'm going to share this app with James. I'm going to click share. So James is going to get an email with a link where James can directly go and access this app. At the same time, if I head back to my SharePoint site, if you look at my group membership here, because it's a team site, you see I have not shared anything with James yet. James has no access on this SharePoint site. So what happens if James logs in? So right now I'm signed in as James, and James is trying to access that app because I have shared the app with James, but I have not shared the permissions. So when James logs in, and he has to go ahead and allow permissions to those connectors. Now here's a key point again. When James logs in, if you notice, the SharePoint connector is going under James's account. So when you're connecting to SharePoint, it is always going to connect to the SharePoint connector with the logged in user's credentials only. You cannot impersonate. You cannot do that in PowerApps. And right here, James is going to connect to SharePoint with his own account. So now if I click allow, what's going to happen right now is it's going to go ahead and lead me directly to the app. I'm getting some error messages right here because it failed to connect to the list. If James tries to go ahead and tries to create a new travel request, he does see the form here. But let's say I go and try and submit this. Notice nothing happens. And the reason is because James does not have the access in the backend SharePoint site. So you have to ensure that you're not only sharing your app with your users, but at the same time, you're granting that user access to the SharePoint site as well. So in this case, I will go ahead and make James a member of my SharePoint site. And this time now, when I sign in as James, if I go ahead and create a new travel request, and I've just gone in and plugged in some sample data, and I just submit my request, there I go, it's successful. And now James can see his own travel requests on the home screen. So it's very important to understand that PowerApps is going to respect the security in SharePoint. So if you would like your users to not have access to specific records in a SharePoint list, you would have to actually go ahead and break security there. You have to handle true security in SharePoint. But the goal of this video is to show you how you can create these role-based apps wherein, based on the logged in user's role, we will show different options to the user. So on the home screen, my travel requests, how am I just showing the current logged in user's requests? Well, right here where I'm filtering the data from my gallery, I have a very simple condition which says, show me all the data. Of course, I have additional filters here, but the main filter here is that the created by .email, that's the column in SharePoint that holds the created by user's information. So get the email of the created by user and check to see if this matches a variable that I'm setting, and I'll show you where I'm setting this, var user.email. And because of this condition, it only shows me the records for the logged in user. Now in PowerApps, on the app object, we have the onStart function that runs once when the user logs into the app. And right here in the app.onStart, I have some configuration settings of my app. And here is that variable that I'm creating, set variable user to an object in PowerApps called user that gives me details about the logged in user. So if you look at this variable right now, this has 3 pieces of information: the full name of the logged in user, the email, and the image. I'm grabbing the email address of the logged in user, and that's how I'm filtering my data on my home page. Now my next requirement is I also have an admin screen that I have created. And basically this admin screen shows me all the travel request information irrespective of the logged in user. And as you can see right here, I can even see the data that the user James submitted. Firstly, how is this gallery showcasing all the data? Well, in this case, I've just not applied that filter for created by .email, not filtering the data by the logged in user. That's why I'm able to see all the data. Of course, from a security standpoint, from a permission standpoint, the logged in user has to have access to all the data in the backend SharePoint list. If the user does not have access to that backend SharePoint list, the user will never see that information right here. So in this case, I've granted all the users contribute access to my SharePoint list. But how do I ensure that the access to this screen is only available for users who are admins? That is, this button right here that says admin screen, or in my case, I also have a left-hand navigation menu component. This link right here for admin. I would like to restrict this based on the logged in user's role. So not every user sees that. Only special users who have a specific role can have that access. So let's see how we can go about doing that. Option number 1, which is a very common use case. In my app, I've gone ahead and connected another SharePoint list called Travel Request Admins. And basically all I have done here is that I have a list created, and in this list, I have a column of type person. And right here, I'm defining who are my admins of the system. Okay, so it's just a plain, simple SharePoint list. I can just go in here and say, yep, I want to add another user. Maybe I want to add Sarah. So let me go ahead and add Sarah right here and click save. And just like that, Sarah has been added to this list. And now I would like to leverage all the usernames who are available in this list. And if they are, then they should be able to see that admin button. On the app.onStart, right here, I will go ahead and I will set a variable. And I'm going to call this variable is user admin. Okay, SP list technique. So I'm just going to say is user admin SharePoint list. That's just the name of my variable. First thing, to query my SharePoint list, I'll use a function called lookup. So go ahead and look up that SharePoint list. Which list? The travel request admins list, which I've connected in my app, where I have that admin person type column. So admin.email is equal to var user. What is var user? It's the current logged in user's information in a variable that I've stored right here in the onStart itself. So var user.email. And lookup is going to basically go query that list, check to see if there's one record available matching this criteria. Now, if there is data available, it's going to return me that record. But I want to set this variable and I want to set it to a Boolean value. So what I will do is this. I will check to see if this is not blank. That means I'm getting a response from this query that I'm firing right here. And that's it. I will go ahead and format the formula so we can see it in a well-formatted manner. Here is my function again. I'm just checking to see if the logged in user belongs to that SharePoint list or not. Now, because I'm in the edit mode of the app, I'll just go and right click here and run onStart. So this function runs. And if I just look at this variable now, it's returning true. And that is correct because if I look at my list, my name, which is Reza, is a part of that list. Now I can leverage this variable and show and hide things in my app. So for example, the admin screen button, I'll head over to the visible property of this button and change this to this variable. So if the variable is true, the user has access, the user is an admin, they will see this. In my case, I also have a left navigation component, which I am setting right here on the fly when the screen loads. So for the admin screen, what I will do is I will remove my link and I will only add it based upon the user being an admin or not. So if user part of the list, in that case, go ahead and collect in my menu this record. And once I'm done with this, just format this text. And once again, I'll go and run app.onStart. Now, if I preview the app, Reza is a part of that SharePoint list. So Reza is an admin. So Reza is going to see this links. Now let's go ahead and remove Reza from this list. So I'm going ahead and revoking my access from this list. Now, if I go back right here and if I just run the app.onStart once again, this time if I preview the app, notice I don't see that button, I don't see the menu icon, so I cannot even navigate to that page. So that's role based. I'm not a part of the admin's list, so I cannot access the admin screen. And let me go ahead and save and publish this app. And now only Sarah is a part of the list. So let's try and log in as Sarah. So Sarah is logging into the app. Because Sarah is an admin, Sarah sees the links to access the admin screen right here. And if Sarah goes here, Sarah is going to see all the data of all the users. Now my next use case is, how do I check to see if the user is a part of that Azure AD security group? Because in my case, it's a SharePoint Team site. So the security goes in the M365 group. And that information is stored in Azure AD. So right here, as part of the group, I have two pieces of information, whether you are a member of the group or whether you are an owner of the group. So for that, first thing what we need is we need to connect to a connector called Office 365 Groups. So I've already gone ahead and connected that in my app. I'm going to set a variable once again on the app on start is user member of the M365 group. Once again, I need the current logged in user's email, so I'll use my variable that I created where user.email is in. I'm going to use the Office 365 groups connector. There's a function called list group members. So I'm going to just use this. And here I need to enter the group ID. Okay, so I need to enter the group ID. Now, where do I get that group ID from? Well, if you go to Azure AD and if you look at your group, the group has something called as the object ID. So I'm just going to copy this, head back to my app and just paste that object ID right here, which is nothing but my group ID. Now, once I get the group members, I'm going to do dot value dot mail because I'm comparing it with the mail. Once I'm done with this, I'll go ahead and format my text. And this time we'll run the app.onStart. And once app.onStart runs, we should see the response right here. And in this case, I'm getting true purely because my user, which is Reza, is a member of the group. So that's how easy it is to check to see if the user is a member of an Office 365 or a Microsoft 365 group or not. You can even check to see if the user is the owner of the group. There's something known as list owned groups. So you can see if the user is a part of the owner of that Microsoft 365 group as well. But for that, you will need to use the Office 365 groups connector. How do I check to see if the user is a part of a SharePoint group or not? Let's also add another case here. If I head over to groups in Office 365, if I head over to groups in Azure AD, I search for a group that I created called Travel Request Approvers. This is just a simple security group that I created in Azure AD. Pretty common use case. Now in PowerApps, there is a connector for Azure AD. And if you connect to this, there is an option where you can provide the ID of your group in Azure AD, in this case, my security group, and I can check to see the members of that group. But if I do that, when a user logs into PowerApps, they would have to authenticate to this connector. And for that, the admin has to grant additional privileges in Azure AD. And trust me, very few admins are going to do that. So I don't want to use the Azure AD connector, but I would like to check to see if the user is part of a security group or the user is part of a plain simple SharePoint group. In my case here, I created a very simple SharePoint group called Travel Request Admins. And as part of this SharePoint group, I only have Reza added to this SharePoint group. So how do I check a SharePoint group membership? There's no function to do that in PowerApps, but there is a trick way of achieving that. And for that, what you will need is an extra list. In my case here, I just created a very simple SharePoint list called security list. And as part of this list, I've just gone and added a couple of items called admins and managers. Okay, I've just added 2 records here. I have 2 SharePoint groups that I am interested in checking the security of. So for every SharePoint group for which you want to check the security of, ensure that you have an item created right here in this SharePoint list. Now here's the trick. For my admins list item, and right here there's an option called share. So I'll go to share, go to the 3 ellipses on top and go to manage access. Right here at the bottom, there's a very small link called advanced. If I select that, so this will take me to the advanced settings. Now this is the default security that gets applied to the list that was created because these are all the SharePoint groups at the site level. Now what I want to do in this case is only grant the admins group access to this list item. So for that, I will go ahead and stop inheriting the permissions, revoke all the permissions except for my admins group. So I'll remove permissions for all the other groups, and that's it. The only group that has access to this record is if the user is a part of the travel request admins group. And now I'll do the same thing for the managers SharePoint group as well. I have this list item right here. I will go ahead and go to manage access, go to advanced, stop inheriting the permissions, select all the items. I only want the manager's permission to apply. That's my SharePoint group. I will remove all the other permissions. And just like that now, I've just granted the travel request manager's SharePoint group access to this record. So this is true security in SharePoint that I have implemented. And remember, PowerApps will respect the security of your SharePoint list. Now if I head over to PowerApps, so here's the formula. I'm going to use a variable called set is user in SharePoint group. And in my case, I'm checking to see the admin SharePoint group. So is user in SharePoint group admin. That's just the name of my variable. For this, I'll go ahead and look up that SharePoint list, which I have already connected right here, my security list. So I'm going to query my security list where the title is equal to admins. And this title is what I've specified right here. When I perform a lookup query against this, I can again check to see if I do receive a response or not. So I'm going to check to see if this is not blank. And if it is not blank, that means the user is a part of the group. Otherwise, the user is not. But there is a record, so how is it going to return a blank in case the user does not have access? Well, if the user does not have access, they won't even see that record in SharePoint because we changed the security of that item. And that's how you can check to see if the user is a part of a SharePoint group or not. Now, if I go ahead and just run the onStart function again, it should return a true because Reza is a member of that SharePoint group. And now I will go ahead and add this logic to the left-hand navigation menu, and I will use that same variable to set the visibility of the admin screen button right here. Now let me go ahead and save and publish this app. So here I am logged in as Sarah, who is not a part of that SharePoint group. So Sarah does not see those options. And if I go back to that travel request admins list and add Sarah to the SharePoint group, now if Sarah logs in, this time Sarah will get the option for accessing the admin screen. Now what about security groups? Well, the beauty about SharePoint groups is you can add a security group in a SharePoint group. So guess what? I have a security group right here called Travel Request Approvers. And as part of this group, I have a couple of members right here, Sarah and James. If James logs in to the app, James is not going to see that admin link purely because James is not a part of that SharePoint group. Now, if I go back to my SharePoint group, I can even add that security group right here, which is my Travel Request Approvers. That's the name of my security group in Azure AD. Now, if I go ahead and share this, as part of this group, I have Sarah and James. Now, guess what's going to happen when James logs in? Because James is a member of that security group, if I just refresh my screen now, check this out. It is providing James the option now to access the admin screen. So right here, James can see all the data. And this is now being driven from the security group in Azure AD. Extremely powerful. And of course, if I need to check more SharePoint groups, well, I just keep adding more items here and breaking permissions. So if I want to check for managers, all I have to do now is go back to my app, and right here, instead of getting the value for admins, I can just change this to managers. And just like that, I can check to see if the user is a part of my travel request manager's SharePoint group or not. If you enjoyed this video, then do like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And thank you so much for watching.